Welcome back to A History of Necromunda, and it's the big one. Last time I had a look at Confrontation, which, while it has a lot of the same background, is quite a different sort of game and never that popular. But in this video, we're going to have a look at the box set that really started it all, 1995's Necromunda. Necromunda, a world of giant hive cities and glittering spires crouched upon a dark underworld of anarchy and violence. In the subterranean depths, the hard-bitten survivors of Necromunda's many terrors stalk through crumbling domes and ancient machines, fighting and dying for the spoils of a derelict civilization. In Necromunda, rival players control gangs of fighters, battling it out amongst a three-dimensional tabletop landscape of ruined buildings, soaring gantries, and walkways. Necromunda was released in October 95 with an announcement and designer's notes in White Dwarf 190. There's no mention of Confrontation at all here. This is presented as an all-new game system, ready to go with expansions already lined up. Necromunda was released in the same format Games Workshop had been transitioning to for the previous 5 years. Big box games with 2 opposing factions, templates, dice, and rulebooks. Necromunda did a few things differently though, and I'm not just talking about the whippy sticks. Seriously, these were such a bad idea to give to kids. The first big difference in the Necromunda box was the terrain. Games Workshop had released terrain elements in box sets before, but nothing on this scale. The cardboard terrain for Necromunda, held together by plastic bulkheads, was easy to assemble, easy to take apart and store, and surprisingly long-lasting. We're still using some of it in our campaigns. It was so successful it went on to influence the first range of actual 40k terrain. The models were a little different too. The box contained 2 plastic gangs, Orlocks and Goliaths, each of which had 2 different sprues. One guy with a knife and a selection of all the basic pistols, and one guy with a selection of all the basic rifles. These weapon arms were push fit, so you could swap weapons out really easily, which was really useful in this game. Arguably though, the biggest difference was the whole concept of the game. This was Games Workshop's first real foray into what we'd now call skirmish games, especially ones with advancement and campaign systems. Everything before this had been at least platoon level or bigger, mostly intended to be played as standalone games, with the exception of maybe the League system in Blood Bowl or Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Since then, skirmish games have become a staple of the Games Workshop offering, from Mordheim to Gorka Morka to Kill Team, but this mix of RPG and wargaming was quite new to us kids playing Warhammer in 1995. The box contained 2 books, the rulebook, which had the rules in, and the sourcebook, which contained all the juicy background and the campaign system. Necromunda is a slightly more contained space than Confrontation. We're still on the hive world of Necromunda, a polluted hive planet ruled over by Lord Helmore, but this time our action's confined to Hive Primus, the largest hive on the planet. In Hive Primus, there are still various clans who clash over industrial and territory rights, but they're now defined as the 6 clan houses: Orlok, Goliath, Cawdor, Delac, Escher, and Van Saar. While they mostly keep things civil in Hive City, as you get further down Hive, you reach the Underhive, the lawless and very heavily Wild West influenced wasteland where the game is set. Full of dead-end towns, hopeful archaeotech miners, homesteaders, and the gangs, fighting proxy wars on behalf of their masters in the Hive City. Each of these 6 new houses got their own metal box set, all of which had the same makeup: a leader, a heavy with a heavy stubber, the standard heavy weapon for a starting gang, 4 gangers, at least 1 with each of the main basic weapons, and then 2 Juves. Blister pack releases followed, which usually gave each gang an alternative leader, some heavies with more interesting weapons, and a couple more gangers and Juves. It's interesting when you look at all this now, how quickly all of it was released and how tightly planned all those releases were. Loads of the metals are pictured in the main rulebook, and the gang boxes were all released within about 4 months of the Necromunda box set itself, most of them in time for Christmas 1995, which is when I got my copy. By February 96, Games Workshop had already moved on to the Outlanders supplement, presumably to keep all those Christmas gift purchasers invested. With this release pace, it would have been a really big new thing in a Games Workshop store at the time. So, how do you play? Well, the rules from Confrontation have been completely jettisoned, thank God. Instead, Necromunda runs on the same basic system as 2nd edition Warhammer 40k, including an I go you go turn structure. Unlike Confrontation, which ran like an RPG initiative system, you'd move, shoot, and fight with all of your gang at once, and then the opponent would do the same. Most of the basic rules would be pretty familiar to 40k players at the time. There were only a few big changes. First, fighters could be pinned, that is, placed face down when they're shot at, which meant they'd essentially miss a turn getting up unless a friend was nearby to help them. Second was the ammo roll. Instead of tracking bullets, weapons could just run out of ammo on a hit roll of 6, and the fancier the weapon, the more chance it would run out. Third was damage. Models that lost their last wound wouldn't just be removed, they'd roll a dice to see if it was a flesh wound. That's a slight decrease in stats. Down, which basically meant you keep missing turns until you roll something else, or out of action, which means removing them from the table, and possible death or injury after the game. Finally, the morale system was rejigged. Fighters who failed a morale check would run for cover rather than off the board in 40k, and once your whole gang had suffered 25% casualties, you'd have to start taking bottle tests. One failed test, and the game automatically ends as your whole gang run away. It was a really good blend. Familiar as a 40k game, but faster, swingier, and slightly more detailed, but even those extra details were pretty quick to pick up. But the real genius of Necromunda was the campaign system. Confrontation's campaign system had essentially stopped at the trading post. There was no real way included of improving your gang over time. But Necromunda introduced an RPG-style leveling system and rules for territory and trading that really affected what happened to your gangers over time. Your gang members, whether they were leaders, heavies, gangers, or juves, each started with a certain amount of experience. Depending on if you lost your game or completed certain actions in games, you'd get a number of experience points, and when a new level was reached, your ganger would get a random upgrade, either a stat boost or a skill. Your gang held territories, and after each game, uninjured gangers could then work them for cash, passing the total through this table based on the number of models in the gang to see how much spending money was left over. Note that only gangers could work the territories, so you didn't want to just fill your gang with heavies and juves. Gangers were required to be half the gang's numbers. However, the real gem of this system was how it accounted and balanced for weaker or more experienced gangs. Each gang had a gang rating, the total value of all the models in it, plus their equipment, plus all their experience points. If you fought a gang with a higher gang rating, not only would you probably get to choose the scenario, but even if you lost, you'd get way more experience, and if you won, you'd get even more income. This meant that you didn't have to run the campaign like a league. Players didn't have to play the same number of games, and people could enter a campaign halfway through and the system would correct for it. Your green gang entering halfway through a campaign would level up more quickly, and the most powerful gangs would slow down their rate of increase as they lost the ability to pick favourable matchups. It worked really, really well. The system also meant that special rules were gradually introduced over time. At the start, all gangs were basically identical. There were no differences in weapon options between houses. In fact, the main difference between the houses was which skills they could get, and they don't come into play until your models start leveling up. So a new campaign always started relatively simple and then got more complex as time went on, and your house, your injuries, your experience, and your territories all came into play. So, with that all in mind, let's build the Springsteens again. Last time, almost everything was rolled at random, but in Necromunda, you buy your gang from a starting stash of 1,000 credits. I'll keep things simple and go for the standard gang setup you would have got in a box. 1 leader, 1 heavy, 4 gangers, and 2 juves. I'll then give them a good spread of weapons chosen from the starting gang weapons list. A cheap but efficient heavy stubber for Little Jack, my heavy, and 1 each of shotgun, lasgun, and autogun for the gangers, and a spare lasgun with a close combat weapon for the 4th one. Finally, 2 juves with pistols. In Necromunda, everyone starts with a knife, so I don't have to buy the visible knife on that juve. Finally, I'll take advantage of my leader being the only person outside a heavy who can have a special weapon and give him a melter gun. I then fill the rest of the gang with weapons that are actually on the models and give each of them a stub gun as a sidearm in case they fall foul of ammo rolls. I've still got a fair few points left, which I could spend on better heavy weapons or something, but I think I'm going to go for extra bodies to make sure I can collect on territory. So I get an extra ganger with an autogun. I couldn't pick anything else until I bought the extra ganger anyway. I'll keep the remaining 35 credits in the stash in case something comes up in the trading post after my first game. So then I roll up experience. Leaders and heavies get 60 plus D6, so Bruce and Little Jack. Right. Gangers get 20 plus d6. Here we go. And Juves get nothing. So not particularly high. One of those auto gunners is a bit more experienced than everyone else. Next, we roll up territories, and that is 5 d66 rolls on the territory table. I'll count the grey dice as 10s. Roll 1. We have 41. That is some tunnels. Not much in the way of income, but they'll let me infiltrate 3 gangers a game. Next one. 36. That's some mine workings. D6 times 10 creds each game, and if I capture someone, I can make them work in it. Next one. 13. Just some old ruins. 53. That is a drinking hole, another D6 times 10 credits. And finally, 51, which is a water still, another D6 times 10 credits. Okay, so none of the really amazing ones, but I've got a solid 3d6 times 10 each game there, plus the ability to infiltrate 3 models. So, not too bad. And that's it. Finally, I calculate my gang rating, adding together the cost of my gangers and equipment, and then all their experience points, giving me a total of 1,202. And there we are. The Springsteens are ready for the first game. But look, we've only seen half of the system here. So let's imagine that we play a nice basic gang fight so that we can do the post-game sequence. Here's what happens. Bruce leads his denim-clad gang into battle for turf against a corridor gang with a rating of 1,500. During the game, 3 of our models are taken out of action, but the Springsteens take a few corridor out of action first and break some others, and the corridor bottle after the 4th turn. Springsteens win the game. Let's see what happens. So in the post-game sequence, next we do injuries. 3 of our gangers were taken out, so let's see what happens to them. Again, this is a D66 roll on the injury table. First ganger, 62. That's bad. He's been captured. He's captured by the opposing gang. Let's assume that I'll opt to play a rescue mission to try and get him back. The second ganger is 36, has an old battle wound. Before each game, he's going to have to roll a dice, and on a 1, his old wound plays up and he can't take part. And finally, my Juve, 43, makes a full recovery. But kids bounce off anything. Next, we do experience. As you can see from the gang fight scenario, everyone who survived until the end gets D6 experience, adding +5 for each of the wounding hits they cause. Plus, since we won a game against someone with a gang rating higher than ours, we get +4 experience per model. And then finally, Bruce gets an extra 10 XP for being the winning gang leader. So let's roll those now. Bruce, Little Jack, Ganger 1, So looking at that, it looks like we've got a few advances to roll up. Bruce is going to get an advance, as are 3 of the gangers and 1 of the Juves, and the second Juve is going to get 2 advances. Juves in this game level up really quickly, and this is a 2d6 roll on the advance table for each one. Bruce is up first, and he gets double 1. I can choose any skill table and randomly generate a skill for it. That's about the best roll you can get. As you can see, an Orlock leader can have everything except muscle, but to be honest, I don't really want a muscle skill, so I'm going to give him a shooting skill. And I roll d6 on the shooting table. 6, which is rapid fire. It's not that useful when you've got a melter gun, so I'll choose the las pistol and he can fire that twice in the shooting phase. Next up is Mikey. And he rolls a 6, which is then roll 1 dice to see which one it is, and Mikey gets +1 to his weapon skill. Next up is Diamond Jackie with a shotgun. He gets an 8, which is another roll of dice, and gains a ballistic skill. Then Slim with the lasgun and pick. He rolls another 8 and another 3, so he's +1 weapon skill as well. Actually quite useful when you've got a pick. And then we get down to Johnny, our Juve for the club, who did extremely well in that last game and gets 2 advances. Now, Juves are terrible, so let's see if we can make them a bit better. He has an 8 followed by a 2, which is +1 weapon skill, and a 5 followed by a 5, so that's +1 attack. And finally, our second Juve, who was injured, gets 1 advance, which is a 5 followed by a 2, and he has +1 strength. Okay, there's all our advances. Next, we figure out our income. One of my gangers is captured, so I've only got 4 left, so I'll send them to my 4 most lucrative places. The tunnels, mine workings, drinking hole, and water still. That gives me 3d6 times 10 plus 15 credits. That's 105. I then get a giant killer bonus, so 20, giving me 125, and I have 9 models in my gang, which gives me 55 credits left over to spend. which increases the gang's stash to 90 credits. Finally, the trading post. I get D3 rolls on the rare trade post. If I had any spare gangers, they could help, but all mine have either collected territory or were captured, so that's that. D3 rolls on the table. That's 3 rolls. And I roll D66 3 times. Here we go. So I roll up a hotshot laser power pack, some flak armor, and some screamers, which are devices I can use if someone tries to raid my settlement to set off alarms quicker. I'm going to buy just the hotshot laser power pack, which costs 15 credits. Finally, with my 75 remaining credits, I'm going to recruit another ganger, this time with an auto pistol and a knife. That leaves me with 10 credits. I'll roll up his experience. He's pretty experienced. He'll be some extra muscle for this rescue mission I now have to go on. Totaling up my gang rating again, that gives me 1,394. That's quite a big jump for their first game. And that's it. The Springsteens are doing pretty well so far. Next time, we'll take a slight detour and we'll look at the Outlanders supplement, which added 4 new gangs and a large dose of flavour to the setting. Thanks for watching.